This being Thursday, April 4th, our last meeting for the term. Personnel and Finance, Thursday, April 4th. And we're holding a meeting for two reasons. One, to just have a discussion and not vote. And the second is because it'll be David's last meeting here. And we want to thank you for all of the years and the term that you've just.
And it's always been a pleasure to serve on this committee.
We appreciate you too. Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order, and Don, would you adopt the agenda?
I move to adopt the agenda.
Okay, we have a second. Second from David. Okay, any comments from the public? Go to public comments. Any comments from the public? Anybody out on Zoom?
Go ahead.
Any comments from anybody in the room? Close public comments. We could approve the minutes of the last meeting.
Second.
Moved by Steve and second by David. Okay. That will be a no vote on it, so we're approving it anyway. Okay. Everybody agree? We got four agreement on the minutes.
I don't know what you're saying.
Well, we can't vote. We can't actually register a vote.
I think, can I clarify? You cannot vote on any items that would go to the county board, right? So you can certainly vote on approving the minutes.
All right.
But in terms of any substantive items that go to the county board, that's for voting right now, because under Robert's rules, when a session closes, if there's any pending material in the committee, it quote falls to the ground.
Okay. So our vote is aye. 4. Oh, aye. Aye. And 4-0 on the minutes. And business items, we'll move on to business items. And we have a report from the finance department regarding our spirit fund report, our general fund, our CIP projects, and the current list. Paul?
I included the CIP project list because it was on the agenda for you. I don't really have any major updates for this at this point. My plan and suggestion for the P&F committee going forward and for the new chairman is that potentially every quarter that I have the people responsible for the project actually come to P&F and talk about them, not filtering it through me or them not getting back to me on what's going on. So that's going to be my recommendation going forward on the CIP. So that's the CIP.
Can I ask you a question on that? So you're going to take care of talking to the next chairman?
Whoever becomes, yes. I will talk to them and see if they are in agreement with not putting it on monthly, because there's not usually updates, especially sometimes in winter, no updates at all. But if there is a significant update monthly, I would bring that to as a report. Otherwise, I would suggest doing it quarterly with the actual people that know more about the project.
I think that would be helpful.
No. No.
On the investments, this year in February, I invested $7.6 million, 1.6 at West Bank and CD, rolled that over for 2 years at 5.2% interest. And then invested some more in T-bonds out, several significant years, trying to get out in 2029, 2030, locking in some of these rates in at 4.2 and 4.4 and 4.5%. So we're still making interest 5, 6, 7 years from now, when we all know hopefully rates will be going down. So I just included the rest of the pages of, this is our portfolio and the cash flows. From, say, I believe it is from April to April. This April through next April, we will be seeing $2 million in interest from the portfolio. That does not include the interest we're also going to receive on the money market account. So right now that's at about 5.1%, and there's about $58 million sitting in the money market. A lot of that money is still ARPA money that has not been dispersed or paid out. So we're still earning interest on that. I did want to point out that since I've been here, we've had $26 million that have come matured in investments. I've invested $52 million, so I've invested that and some more funds that we have that I feel we're gonna start rolling right now. I'm pretty much feel unless something really good comes up, I'm done investing. Because I have money out 4, 5, 6, 7 years, and it's coming due like $20 million a year. It's gonna start maturing like it did this year. So I've got a lot of the buckets filled up. If you look at the investments, the second to bottom line is showing the investments we had before. So previously we had right now we have 130 million, $78 million is locked in from what was done prior to me being here. That's still locked in, going out to, I think, 2028 or in some investments. Them investments brought in $1.5 million of interest at a 2% interest rate. But when I looked at it, the majority of them were bought at a premium, meaning the true interest rate is more like a 1.6%, because you're paying more to get that interest payment coming in. What I've done now is, if you look at the interest rate of the 52 million I invested, it's 3.97 is the interest rate, but the effective interest rate is 4.3. Because I bought most of them. I bought them either at face value or at discount. So you don't see, if you look at the interest on the actual investment, it's lower, but the true interest we're getting once they mature is going to be more, because I bought them at discounts. So just want to give you a little more of the last reading for the investments. I did, yes.
So is Executive Daniel giving you a big bonus for all this good work?
You don't get bonuses in the county. I have to go back to private if I want to. So I didn't include anything in the spirit. We had the ARPA commission and strategy meeting yesterday. Right now, the majority of the meeting, and it was identified, if you remember, the 50% the county identified government projects, and then the other 50% the government projects. The bottom portion of the government projects, the board has approved everything except the $115,000 of the initial principal, the 16.6 million that was put in there. But now there's still the 1.2 million. Nothing was decided on yesterday, because for Mary Ann, you can't pass nothing to the board because it's the board coming up. So I think they're having one more meeting coming up next month to decide on the restructuring of that commission, whether the citizen board members are going to need to still be on there or not. So, and what to do with the interest. So there are some discussions on that. Of the 50% that is still sitting in the county government identified projects, there is about 8.2 million of that has not been already approved by the board, still remaining. So about 50% of the 16 million is still remaining there to be spent. Granted, there are some of the projects like the land, water, and conservation that had 3 million put to it. We've spent about $2,000 of that so far. So that one is gonna be several years in the making, hopefully to get that spent. So that's the,
I think it's like the parks too. The parks isn't gonna spend.
parks probably won't spend
$3.9
the 3.9.
The Walkaw Dam will probably get done this year, but the rest of it's probably very little. You know, and as far as that interest money goes, I don't think as a county board, we ever decided how we were gonna spend any of the interest money, if we were gonna give half to, you know. So I think that still is to be decided on where that money is gonna be spent, because we never said that half of the ARPA funds that we received, we were giving to those two categories, but we never said what the interest money was gonna go to, you know.
Right,
So
that's
I
still
think that we can't just put that into the community projects without the county board approving it, because it never was approved that way.
Right, that was the ARPA commission was gonna, they were gonna make a recommendation, and it still had to be for approval,
But
but
still,
that won't be till May.
And I think too, like last month, some of the county board members think that we didn't spend hardly any of the county's money, and really, it's well over half spent. There's less than $9 million left to spend. We basically spent over half of it.
We've appropriated half of it, we haven't spent it.
We haven't spent it, but I mean, the money is
Yeah,
gone,
right.
and there's
It's been
not that
appropriated.
much left for county projects, so what we have left, we have to basically use wisely, because we have an awful lot of expenses coming up, and we only bond for $10 million a year, unless we're gonna change that one year and bond significantly more. We're not gonna be able to complete the projects that we have on the books.
Agreed. So, Morris wanted to include the fund reserve policy in one more time, so I'm gonna turn it over to him on.
well, we have not had a full reading and a vote on the readings. And until we do that, until we have a first reading and a second reading vote, we don't turn it loose to the board. Period. So what we want to do is actually read through this and give our opinion of it, you know, as you see it. And then, you know, we'll come back and talk about it at another time. I think Paul needs to go through this with us at this point and kind of explain what he's done to make changes. I noticed that we do not have a restricted definition being used in the policy. And he may want to tell you why he's not using the restricted use in the policy, but the definition, one of the 5 definitions of the fund is a restricted use. So I'm going to leave it to Paul to explain the definitions and why we're doing what we're doing. I know they've got them all written out.
Well, I've explained this twice already to the committee. This would be the 3rd time I'm going through this policy. If you look on page 1, item number 2, says restricted fund balance. So I'm not sure where Supervisor Cox is not saying where I'm not defining restricted fund balance. It's defined on number 2 on page 1. Restricted fund balance is amounts that can be spent only for the specific purposes stipulated by external resources provider, either constitutionally or through enabling legislation. Examples include grants and dedicated property taxes. As the discussion I had with Supervisor Cox on Wednesday, I highlighted this says constitutional and legislative, mostly meaning state. So that is restricted, and that is how I have been defining it and using that for Winnebago County. Committed fund balance is basically, it says amounts constrained to specific purposes by government itself using its highest level of decision-making authority, the county board. To be reported as committed amounts cannot be used for any other purposes unless the government takes the same highest level action by the board to remove or change the constraint. Committed amounts are typically established with formal board or finance committee resolution. So committed means P and F is recommending it and the board is approving it. And that is basically the most of the funds are committed, or number 4, assigned, or number 5, unassigned. Assigned funds are basically, I'm not gonna read verbatim every one of these, but assigned funds basically are, we assign them to public health. Public health is so much. We assign them to, well, DHS is a special revenue, so I won't say that one. We assign it to, well, I guess I could go to page 2, where it has the unassigned general fund, which is the bigger fund, but here I was defining, and this is where Supervisor Cox was talking to me on Wednesday, that some of these he thought would be restricted. And I said I would verify, but the only one I thought that potentially could be restricted would be the jail improvement fund, if there was legislation on that, or by the state. But I have them defined right now as committed. For jail improvement, public health is assigned, property lister is assigned, scholarship fund is committed because it was voted on by the board. Boat launch is assigned, technology replacement fund is assigned, land records is assigned, and IDB was committed as it was authorized by the board to be a separate, amount and entity or board. So this is the definitions I was using as the funds that we currently have. We do have a lot of funds, which I didn't talk about. The number 1 on back page was non-spendable funds. Non-spendable funds are, for the most part, delinquent taxes, inventory, or prepaid items. You can't spend the delinquent taxes until somebody pays them, and now they're not delinquent, they're actual payments for the delinquent taxes. So, I put the definitions of it. The first part of the policy was meant to define for GASB 54, and based on information I got from Herbert Rose, who I used as a consultant to help me on this policy. And I also talked to the GFOA. If you don't know, they're an organization for finance officers throughout the nation, to help with county government and all governments. So them 3, basically, I talked to them to help me with this policy and GASB 54, which basically defines a lot of these things. And I just pulled it directly out of GASB 54 to define it. So we have the general fund, we have the unassigned general fund. Proprietary funds are basically, for Winnebago County, is the airport fund, solid waste fund, Parkview Health Fund, and the highway fund. Them are also referred to as enterprise funds. Then there is basically my whole feeling of this policy. What I was trying to do is the policy I read initially that we had that was last approved in 2020, basically talked about the general fund. It didn't talk about all these other things. I wanted to put something together that made it a little more clear of, we got a lot of different funds. And not everybody knows that we have a lot of these different funds taking care of different things throughout the county. So I was trying to make that a little more evident here with, this is what GASB 54 says, and this is what Winnebago County. I do not have every single fund that we have on here. There are funds that we have that are for pension or OPEB, which is pension liability. There are funds on here for other things that are more strictly monitored, and there are regulations for them that I did not put on here because they have their own government. You have to do this. I mean, if you don't do it, you're gonna get in trouble with government organizations, IRS, potentially other, like that. So some of them I didn't include in here, but I included what I thought were the majority of the funds that the board should be made aware of and have more knowledge of how many we have. Along with some of the funds are internal service funds. General services is, we used to have more of this, but they still do some printing. and mailing and so forth and so on for the county out of general services. Workers' compensation, property liability, health insurance, dental insurance are all funds we currently have.
Leaving a break family once in a while time alive. Okay.
So them are the internal service funds, that we currently have. An internal service fund basically is you provide a service to the rest of the county. We have health insurance, so you figure out how much health insurance costs based on that. You charge that out to the different departments, and then either the balance goes up or it goes down. You reduce premiums, you increase premiums. You kind of try to monitor that. So based on this, you try to have, say, 4 months of expenses in your reserve so that you don't ever go belly up and have to take it out of your unassigned general fund. So that's the purpose of your internal service fund. Special revenue funds, human services is classified as a special revenue fund. I think we all know what DHS is. And then we also added 3 new ones because of the money we got.
There's nothing to stop here.
Spirit fund / we use the ARPA, neighborhood improvement fund, and the opioid fund. These are designated as a special purpose. You cannot just spend them for anything you want to. You know, there are definitions of categories. There is reporting every 6 months normally, where you have to report on the opioid fund, the neighborhood improvement fund, and we still have to report on the ARPA fund, even though we have transitioned them into spirit fund. So there is all kinds of regulations on normally special revenue funds. Then I just had a little note just to make sure that I put down debt service fund and capital projects fund. I didn't go into a lot of detail what they are. We all know we bond normally in November. We know we have capital projects, which we talked about, a lot of them normally for the county and potentially a lot more coming. So the next page is basically just kind of define the general fund, the unassigned, the assigned, the fund balance. And it kind of goes through and says, trying to define a calculation by the numerator and the denominator and what our target range should be. So the numerator is the balance in the unassigned general fund and the human services fund. It also includes the others assigned funds like public health and the ones I listed on the other page previously. That's the numerator is the balance. The denominator is the expenses that we had for that year. So right now, I mean, we have 20 to 25%. Based on my really quick calculation before we got down to this meeting, we're not through the audit. DHS and public health still say they have some revenue potentially coming in. I don't know, I think it's about 100,000, so it's not going to affect them much, but I think we're around about 27%. So we're above the 25%. So that's going to equate to about 1.5 to 2 million more than what this calculation would say. I didn't have a chance to go and look at what our old calculation was or what it would be before this meeting. So just to give you a feeling of where I think we're at, but once again, that is really ballpark, and that is unless the auditors find something. The auditors will be in here April 22nd for 2 weeks. So they'll be in here through the first week of May. Our Form A is due on May 15th, which is the preliminary reporting of our financial statements. And I'm hoping that we will be done at the end of May with the audit and have our financial statements back from them. And not wait till have the last date, July 31st, is when they actually have to be filed. So I'm hoping that the timeline will be moved up this year and we can start getting into the budget hopefully sooner than last year. So that's, I think, all I really wanted to cover on here. If anybody has questions, Supervisor Cox is on the page right now.
I did have a statement in here about the appropriate amounts to be considered for a stabilization fund at certain levels.
Yeah.
Could you kind of give us an explanation as to what at least half will be used to establish a budget stabilization fund, a half of what we're deciding in the 20 to 25%, or?
Basically what I tried to do was, I mean, if we're under the 20%, we gotta figure out what we're gonna do to cut expenses and cut the budget in order to increase that. What I've learned is the budget's one thing, actuals is another, so I'm trying to get into the mode of trying to bring up more about actually what's happening versus everybody talking about budget. The budget is not what we have in our bank account. So this is more based on what I think actuals. If we're under, then we need to come up with a plan and we need to present that plan to the board. I'm hoping we'll get to that point, but I mean, with all the projects we have coming out, who knows for sure. If we're over, there was three kind of things I found that others have done, whether it was Wisconsin State, which they did part of this. Other counties have that in fund policies. I went out looking for other examples. So I found some good ones. I found some that were really, really old, 2014, 15. So that's one reason why I started in this. The first one is to take an amount and reduce the amount we might have to borrow. Number two is for a one-time expenditure in the county that might potentially, or would, not might, that would reduce operating costs on an ongoing basis. And the third one, which seems to be bringing up the most conversation, is to put at least half of it in the budget stabilization fund. This is something that Wisconsin did back in like 2008 and 2009, because they were under, they had nothing left, they were negative, they were almost bankrupt. Not to say that, but they were pretty close. So they started a budget stabilization fund to put that into, to start building a reserve. That wasn't in your unassigned, it was designated for the budget. I've heard discussions of Supervisor Cox and Supervisor Barry about tax levy, reducing that. But, you know, you have your tax levy, you're only usually, last year we were allowed to increase, the tax levy by 1.2%, which was about $700,000. We all know what inflation has done, for everything else we're buying is 10% plus for the last 3 years. So increasing at 1.2% is not much of us to try to still run the county with everything that's going on. So I get what's wanting to be done, but each year for the last several years, the mill rate has been able to be brought down. I mean, that if you can continue to do that, you're still looking towards the future to being able to bring that tax levy down. Part of this budget stabilization fund also, I mean, if you have money sitting in your budget stabilization fund, you don't necessarily, if you can use that, you can reduce how much you tax. So in essence, if you have a budget stabilization fund, you kind of could use it to reduce your tax levy by using it in your budget and not using the full amount of the tax levy. So I don't get the point about why the budget stabilization fund is a contra to a tax levy decrease. It kind of potentially is a way of looking at how you will be able to do that. So, that's all I've got on that.
You follow that? You understand what he's, when Charles Perry brought up the point that he wanted to use the funds from the stabilization fund directly into the tax levy. A tax levy actually is figured before the stabilization fund, or before you pull the money to get it into the stabilization fund. So what I'm trying to understand by what he wants is how would you pull more money out and put it into the stabilization fund if you were using the rules for the tax levy as it's prepared into the budget, because it happens before you ever get to pulling for the stabilization fund. You follow what I'm saying?
Okay, I'm gonna just go this way on it. You need to create your budget stabilization fund first. If you don't have a budget stabilization fund, you can't pull from it. You can put it to your unassigned general fund, and you can keep building that up. But then at some point, that's gonna be questioned. I'm on a recording, so I'm gonna say exactly how I feel on some of that, but it's budget stabilization fund, you can continue to build that. Whether you use that to decrease taxes in your next year's budget, that is a potential where you can use your budget stabilization fund and not tax it the full 100%. So in essence, you'd be decreasing your tax levy for what Supervisor Cox would want. But you could also be building your budget stabilization fund that now that you want to only borrow 10 million, but you got 5 million in your budget stabilization fund that you may want to fund other capital projects with that 5 million. So I'm looking at it not necessarily as tax levy, but a way of funding some of our capital projects going forward without borrowing.
It seems to me that you're giving yourself a little more flexibility in how you fund various projects or how you fund the tax levy, but you are leaving it up to how you would like that to be flexed, whichever way. And I'm asking that we not relieve the board of that duty to be able to vote on whether they want it in the stabilization, whether they want it in the tax levy, or whether they want to do other CIP projects. In other words, leave the final analysis to the board to vote.
And my control.
Mike Keller, do you want to?
Yeah, just some comments related to that. I think it's important to remember that by statute, the county board sets the levy every year at budget time. You know, that's where the crucial decision is made by the board, how much to levy. And we can't really change that. If we put in this policy, we're going to levy this much or apply so much of this to a levy, that's not binding on the board at the next budget meeting. The board can overrule that just by voting on the levy resolution at budget time. So by establishing a stabilization fund, that will more directly allow the board to take that into account when setting the levy. There are several ways in which the board could decide to use that stabilization fund to reduce the levy during any given year. The board can use that stabilization fund directly just by budgeting a fund transfer in from the stabilization fund. That'll treat it as general revenue, essentially, when it comes to balancing the budget. The board could also elect to apply that to capital spending and reducing potential borrowing. That will also more indirectly reduce the tax levy by reducing borrowing costs, which is a separate levy above the cap. And if we don't have borrowing, we don't have to levy the debt service expense. And there are several other ways we could too. I mean, county budgeting is inherently an exercise in, how much do we want to over budget, because it's an appropriation that, you have to give departments authority to spend. They aren't always going to actually have to spend that much, but you can't under budget because then they're in a bind if they do need the money. But you can also use, a stabilization fund as, you could enlarge the contingency fund, for instance, and then ask departments to budget very close to the line, very, not conservatively, I wouldn't say but very tightly. as accurately as possible without worrying too much about whether you're going to have to spend a little bit more because we can take it out of the fund. That would again be a way of reducing potentially the tax levy by using the budget stabilization fund. So I think that that fund actually really does put the onus on the board and the duty on the board to make that decision, but at budget time when it has to be made according to the state budgeting process.
Thank you. I appreciate all your comments and how you're explaining this. People are gonna wanna, question at a later time or write amendments or whatever else, and we'd like them to view this particular meeting as an overview of what our policy is going to be and what we're going to eventually vote on. But we want to be able to read through this, as I said before, read through it and understand it and understand where it's coming from. So that when you get ready to vote on it, we actually vote on the second and third reading of policy. And then we'll put it to the test by taking it to the board on a resolution. Okay? Everybody understand?
I was happy with the last one, but you had questions with it, so when you're happy with it, I'm ready to take it to the board.
Thank you. David? Okay, thank you very much. We've had a report on the general fund. We've had a report on the investment fund, and we've had a general policy discussion. Okay, at this point in time, we've got to figure out if we're going to have another meeting, and I guess we're going to have to wait for the new members of this committee to choose that. So it's going to remain open. And we're ready for adjournment.
So moved.
Second. Moved by Don, second by Dave.
And again, I want to thank everybody from this committee. I've really enjoyed working with you.
Thank you. We all appreciate you and your knowledge, and you've been around for such a long time. Thank you much.